The group stood at the edge of the forest on the northern side of Teiyu under an overcast sky. Gar prepared holy water to cast protection from evil and good on Laren in an attempt to rid her of whatever being had attached to her, hoping to be able to do the same for Chasiana, May, and himself afterward. As the spell finished, Laren struggled in an internal battle, as suddenly a shadow being was forcefully detached from her, which quickly attempted to escape to the nearby forest, but the rest of the party quickly destroyed it. Chasiana was impressed with how quickly the group was able to discover the true nature of the curse on Teiyu, and changed from her previous doubting nature toward the party, promising that if the party took care of this evil, she would take them to the Cloud Spires. The group decided to head back into Teiyu to request more holy water from the temple to rid the rest of the group from any shadows before proceeding into the forest, for fear that the shadows may interfere with them during combat. While waiting for Alcaeus to return with holy water, the party discussed their plans for ridding Teiyu of this evil, and contemplated using one of the shadows currently attached to them as a sort of guide by chasing it back to its source after being banished from them. Zeus remembered hearing that ghosts often reside in the ethereal plane, and decided to test if these were actually ghosts that were attached to the group by casting Blink, temporarily transporting himself to the ethereal plane. But unfortunately, he only saw flat terrain and smoky wisps of ethereal energy, with no ghosts in sight. While the party continued discussing what the true nature and origin of these shadows may be, Gar's attention was diverted to a hooded figure emerging from the temple, holding a tray of holy water. The figure removed their hood, revealing that they actually had no head, and they slammed the tray of holy water to the ground, as the vials and the figure dispersed into a shadowy mist. Gar realized that it was a hallucination caused by the shadow, and shortly after, Alcaeus returned with 4 actual vials of holy water. Gar provided gold to the temple to begin creating more holy water, and the party returned to the edge of the forest. May attempted to purge the shadow from Chasiana, but Chasiana was unsuccessful in fighting it. And after Gar was also unable to successfully fight off the shadow, Gar suggested using a magic circle spell to mass cleanse the group all at once. Mavis pulverized 500 silver into powder, and Gar and May spent the next hour creating additional holy water using the powdered silver. Gar used the holy water to create a magic circle, with Gar, May, and Chasiana standing inside, and Zeus, Mavis, and Laren standing at the edge of the forest preparing to destroy all but one of the shadows, following the final one into the forest. And as the circle was completed, the plan was set into effect. The party destroyed 2 of the shadows, and Mavis cast the Expeditious Retreat spell on himself, so that he and Laren were able to pursue the last shadow into the forest, barely keeping pace with it. Mavis and Laren were able to keep pace for several minutes until Mavis tripped over a branch, and Laren fell back to help, which was all the time needed for the shadow to disappear into the now dark, dead forest. The rest of the party followed a trail of silver pieces intentionally dropped by Mavis during the chase, eventually catching up to Laren and Mavis. The party took a moment to rest when they began hearing a deep tapping sound further into the forest and proceeded to investigate the source. The party eventually came to a small clearing where they saw a hooded figure sitting on a stump slowly tapping the heel of their foot against the stump. The group proceeded with caution, acknowledging the possibility that the figure could be the warlock they had heard of. Gar and May approached the figure and tried to get the figure's attention, but it simply continued to tap its heel against the stump. Gar was able to identify that the figure appeared to be an illusion, and May gently let her flail bump into it, when suddenly the figure dissolved into a mountain of falling spiders that skittered off into the forest. Laren was able to identify a section of trees that looked particularly overgrown, almost as if trying to keep away outsiders, so the party proceeded in that direction. Eventually, the party emerged from the overgrown thicket, seeing a decrepit stone archway, decayed from time, and a small ruins with a perfectly preserved fountain in the center, still filled with water. The water itself seemed to be wispy and shadowy in nature, and Mavis and Zeus approached to get a sample to investigate. When Mavis's eyes focused on the water began to form the shapes of faces, and he heard a voice in his head whisper, "Mutant, cursed, failure." And Zeus heard the voice of Thalon in his head, screaming in agony, and familiar roars seemingly implying that they were tearing Thalon apart. Both Mavis and Zeus quickly backed away from the fountain, and the waters of the fountain began to bubble, as mists of shadow began to gather together over the fountain. Zeus quickly released a fireball straight onto the fountain, and as the smoke and flames settled, the fountain appeared unharmed, and the gathered shadow formed into a large mass with glowing blue eyes staring back at the party, also appearing unharmed. The gathered shadow's sinister voice echoed through the party's minds as it looked on them and said, "Foolish mortals, you ventured too deep. Now you will die like the rest of them." When suddenly the party noticed a shadow identical to the first one approaching the group from behind, and the party engaged the shadows. Over the course of the battle, Gar summoned a spiritual weapon that pierced the shadow over the fountain, causing the shadow to suddenly disappear, revealing that it was an illusion meant to distract the party. Also during the battle, shadows like the ones that attached to the party before began to emerge from the forest, affecting the party in different ways, causing fear, distraction, and sometimes even tripping members of the party. As time went on, the gathered shadow clearly appeared to be losing, and it raised its hands to the sky and let out a terrifying scream as 7 shadows rapidly flew out of the forest, merging with the gathered shadow, causing it to grow even larger and appear healthier than before, now towering over the party. The gathered shadow and its shadow minions ceaselessly tried to destroy the party, but the group's resolve prevailed, banishing the creature from the forest for good. As the party recovered from battle, a small cluster of branches fell from the overgrown canopy above, revealing the sky, now clearing of the overcast clouds previously overhead, and a single ray of light pierced through to the ground, seemingly indicating that the forest had been purged, and that the effects of the dark force that distorted the forest had already begun to fade. The group investigated the fountain, no longer wreathed in shadow, and May identified a symbol belonging to a being known as Shar, the Night Singer, from the Shadowfell plane. The group was also able to find magical items and gems inside the fountain, and a journal left behind by the warlock. The journal suffered from the same decay as the forest, but few parts were still able to be read. The journal spoke of contacting the Shadowfell, of a shadow being responding and demanding the warlock's service, providing victims for the shadow to grow until the shadow became powerful enough to not need the warlock's help anymore. The warlock also spoke of gathering magical items from adventuring victims for the shadow to utilize to create a more permanent tear to the Shadowfell, using the fountain as its center. The warlock began to doubt his actions, believing that he had done a terrible wrong, and then the journal ended. The party took the items, and Mavis used his last bomb and proceeded to explode the fountain just for good measure, and then the group returned to Teiu. Upon arriving in Teiu, the last bits of overcast sky faded above the party, revealing clear skies and warm sunlight, and the group made their way to the temple to share the news, where they found that everyone that had been affected by the gathered shadow had returned to normal. Families were reunited, cheer was high, and the town was forever grateful for the party's efforts. The party spoke with Alcaeus, and he also expressed his sincere thanks and announced that a humble celebration would be held in the party's honor. A tear fell from Alcaeus' face as he expressed solemn, genuine gratitude to the group.
"I do not know how to thank you. As I told you before, it is not always easy for people to do the right thing. Some people in their youth are drawn to power and spend their entire lives trying to rectify their mistakes."
Sharing that he was the warlock from years ago, without saying the words out loud. The party now prepares to join in the celebration of the freedom brought to Teiu, before finally finishing their journey to the Cloud Spires.